Paul Fitzgerald, who's the Senior Vice President here of the SSAA Incorporated, which is the national body, also President of SSAA Western Australia. So welcome, Paul. That's probably a good segue into, an update on what's going on in Western Australia and where we're at. So I think last time we spoke, it was just before in the lead up to the Western Australian election. And, we've got the results from that now. You just said 6 National Party members. And I assume the Libs picked up a few, but it wasn't a particularly successful run from them. And certainly, I think Labor did better than people expected, and the Libs did worse than people expected. So, where does that leave us in terms of shooting over there and the new laws that are being implemented?
So, what I can tell you is that from the Liberal Party perspective, there has been a change of the leadership. So, yep. Basil Zempilas is now the leader of the Liberal Party in Western Australia. There was a number of Liberal Party members that picked up seats. Adam Hort. Do you think,
just on that, do you think Basil will be more inclined to take a bit of a firmer stand than Libby Madams was?
I think what you'll find is that some of the elected candidates that are now members of Parliament for the Liberal Party in Western Australia, from a grassroots level, at a branch level, the Liberal Party have heard the message. They've seen the success that the National Party achieved at the state election, regardless of who has now become the official opposition leader in the leader of the Liberal Party. But I think the Liberals, and I've spoken to a number of members of Parliament that have been recently elected, and they've openly and publicly offered their support. And there'll be the critics out there that say, well, it's all a little bit too late for them to do that. But unfortunately, that's the political process, as you may well understand with your background. But moving forward, we now have essentially a coalition that the National Party and the Liberal Party have agreed to. Shane Love, as promised on the first day of the Parliament in Western Australia, rose in the chamber and tabled a disallowance motion against the WA Firearms regulations of 2024. That's yet to be debated. So the good thing is that the Liberal Party and the National Party have now come together in Western Australia on this issue, and they have openly and publicly stated that they will seek to engage with the Labor Party, engage with the Police Minister, who, on that note, I might add, the previous Police Minister is no longer. We now have a new State Police Minister in Reece Whitby, who's from a media background. So we might be able to experience a little bit more civility than the previous Police Minister who came from a military background. And it
was pretty, he wasn't particularly friendly, was he? Just a very brusque sort of way about him, Papalia, and he just didn't brook a lot of discussion. He didn't seem to want to engage genuinely or openly with people. He just said, this is what we're doing, this is how it is.
I think he was, nicknamed the warrior for the WA Labor Party in Western Australia. They needed someone that could come out and bash and crash their way through the community. And the previous Police Minister demonstrated that quite well. And now we need to try to unpick some of this stuff, which already is proving not to be workable. And some of these regulations are starting to have a huge impact on licensed firearm owners in Western Australia.
So you might want to just walk through that.
Yeah, so that's actually going to be outlined in another article that I've written for Western Australia's largest rural publication, which is called the Farm Weekly. I think we're up to about a dozen articles now. They come out every Thursday. It's not an advertisement for that publication, but it is a good platform for the Sporting Shooters Association to reach out into the rural communities and talk to the landowners and the primary producers so they understand who we are and what our members do. So that process is a number of portal logins, which essentially in Western Australia now, ID government identifier in Western Australia.
That's a digital ID process, isn't it?
That's a digital ID. Yeah, there is an alternative to that, which has recently been interrogated in the federal parliament. And for those watching this, there is an opportunity not to adopt a digital ID under federal legislation. So there is an alternative being provided by the regulator in Western Australia. But essentially, all participants in the firearms space in Western Australia need a digital ID on the My ID platform. In Western Australia, the licensing system operates in the back end talking to the Department of Transport, because it's all under licensing services. So firearm owners and landowners alike, primary producers, also need to have access to the Department of Transport website and make sure their details are correct.
Yeah.
Then if they seek to register their land for the use of a firearm, they need to check their certificate of title details through the WA Landgate website, and then retain those three portals and the information in there, and then log on to the WA Police Firearms portal and register themselves as a user. They'll be able to see all their data that's been adopted into that new digital portal, and they'll be able to make applications, etc., etc. But here we are 2 weeks in to the enlivenment of the digital firearm licensing portal, and by and large, most users have experienced an issue, because if everything is not perfectly lined up, full name, date of birth, previous addresses, etc., then you just hit a wall, and there will be a large number of older farmers and landowners who are not so, digitally smart and haven't got the wherewithal to navigate through 4 types of digital platforms to be able to land on the fact that they already have a firearm license, and that's how they function moving forward. So there's some big hurdles for WA Police to get through.
So this is you've got to do this even if you don't want other people on your property, just so that you can use your own firearms on your property, you have to go through this whole process. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So if you're a farmer and you have a 22, then you need to register your own property through firearm licensing services to be able to legally discharge a firearm on that property. So you've got regulation for the sake of regulation.
Yeah, you got to have a My ID. You got to go to do the digital ID or the alternative, but I imagine digital ID is actually more convenient for most people. You've got to then go and link that with the land license and registration, I assume.
There's another step in between there, which is the Department of Transport.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So you link it with transport, then you link it with your licensing and registration through the police, and then you've got to add in your folio number at the same time and your property details and everything else. Right. It sounds terrible.
And one of the other parts of this legislation is the introduction of what's called a written authority. So landowners in Western Australia, keeping in mind that the business of primary producers, landowners, providing a written authority or written permission for a firearm owner to use a firearm on their property as a pest controller or a hunter, in this instance, they need to also register for their own firearm use.
Yeah.
And there's discussion about how many authorities a landowner can issue.
Yeah.
So in the early press releases from the WA Police Minister, there was discussion about a limit of 5, 10 and 15 written authorities for a firearm owner. And that's now been enlivened by WA Police to say that those ceilings are in the legislation, but they are suggesting to us at the SSAA that if a landowner writes to WA Police and requests a greater number of authorities with a genuine need or a genuine requirement for more hunters to go onto their property, it might be a 100,000 acre West Australian pastoral lease, and they might require 25 or 50 written authorities for various people to come up there at different times of the year and go hunting or be a pest controller. Then WA Police have indicated to us that is possible, and it is not a hard and fast ceiling, but that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, right. So you haven't seen any instance of where they've given above those ceilings, but and if the interesting thing there is that if the numbers are in the legislation, what power are the police using to go above that?
So there is no numbers in legislation or regulations.
Gotcha.
It's purely a policy.
Yeah.
And again, we've only seen those in anecdotal media releases and things like that. But a interrogation of the regulations, which is 307 pages, it doesn't talk about a specific number. It talks about the power in the regulations for WA Police to limit the number of written authorities. And again, one of the other key points that I do need to make here to SSAA members and firearm owners across Australia is that it is to do with the license holder, not the number of firearms that they hold. So one authority, in this instance in Western Australia, would permit a person to have up to 5 firearms for hunting, and it wouldn't have any impact on the number of authorities that can be issued by the landowner, or in the event that they own the land themselves, if the hunting pressure or availabilities are there and 5 different types of firearms are required, only one authority would be required for that license holder with 5 firearms.
So it's per person, not per firearm.
Correct.
Yeah, right. Okay. Because I mean, it's an interesting arrangement there, isn't it? You've got to have, as I understand it, you have each firearm that you own is then on your actual license. So it's not just a general license for any type A or any type B firearm. You have this particular type of Class A firearm and this particular serial Class B firearm. Is that correct, or have I got that wrong?
So in Western Australia, there is no licensing of the person.
Yeah,
so
right.
essentially, in the new legislation, they've continued the fact that you can only have a firearm license, in quotes, if you have a firearm and the firearm is licensed to you. So you're not a. So when you get a driver's license, you can get a motor vehicle driver's license, and you can never own a vehicle. And if somebody lent you their vehicle with permission, you could drive it. But in the firearm space in Western Australia, each firearm is licensed to the individual for a genuine reason and a genuine need. And there are only, essentially, for 90% of participants, there's only 2 ways that you can get a firearm license: for the firearm to be used in a club competition environment, or in the new legislation, recreational shooting has been removed. So you can only have a firearm in that instance to go hunting, and you need permission from a landowner to hunt on their land, or you'll give yourself permission to hunt on your own land holding.
Yeah.
There is no public space, Crown land, state forest hunting in Western Australia.
Yeah, okay. Right. So this brings its own problems, I imagine. I mean, a lot of the complaints of landholders around the country with pest management is that a lot of the pests have these safe havens of national parks and, Crown land. No one shoots there, and then they come onto the other property for grazing and everything else, and the farmers are bearing the burden of that, bearing the burden of managing the pests that are breeding up and have a haven in the Crown land. And I imagine this way exacerbate that. Do you expect, if it's just too hard for a bunch of older farmers, do you expect there'll just be periods, well, I've got a firearm, I've got a license, and I own my own property, therefore I'm going to shoot on it, and they're not going to go through that process of, registering their property and what have you? Do you expect some of that to happen?
Potentially, but again, the catch-all is that even Western Australia is a big place, Tom. Okay, it's in comparison to other states.
Really. Yeah,
correct. Yeah, so the ability for WA police to police that is very, very difficult. But what we'll see is 700 kilometres away from Perth, there'll be a landowner who has a licensed firearm and may have had that licensed firearm for 40 years. Through their own requirement to satisfy their genuine reason to continue to own that firearm, they'll have to register their property.
Yeah.
And they may just register for themselves, because lots of people that are in regional places around Western Australia, they're not particularly big on entering into the digital world and having contact with police all the time. They just want to go about their business, pay their license, in this instance for a firearm, and they don't want to have to provide a constant tether to the regulator with this backwards and forwards. Yes, I'm still here. Yes, I'm still compliant, because they're busy running a farm, to be brutally honest, or a station. This mistaken belief by the WA Labor government that every regional landowner in Western Australia has a high-speed internet connection that is stable and solid is complete rubbish, because that's not the case. And we have firearm owners that operate in remote Aboriginal communities across Western Australia, out in the desert, and by and large, they don't have a strong, solid, stable internet connection. So there'll be a large number of firearm owners in various parts of the landscape that are going to struggle to be able to very quickly and easily access this digital platform. That being said, the 50-year-old paper-based system that we've had in Western Australia, there's been cries forever for that to be fixed. Okay, it's a bit archaic. We were still using the Australia Post surface mail system for 95,000 people to receive their license on an annual basis.
Yeah,
and
right.
In 2025, that just doesn't cut the mustard. So, and again, without sympathising with all of these changes, the bottom line is that we are well and truly in the digital age, and firearm owners of various ages expect to be able to operate in the digital space. And they want to walk into a gun shop, flash a plastic card, and the retailer will be able to see what firearms they have, and they can prove their identity. So we haven't seen any of that yet. We'll see a long period of transition in Western Australia. The focus from WA Police that I've been informed of as state president in Western Australia is that they are going to spend the next 9 months transitioning 85,000, 90,000 people into the digital environment, because that's their focus.
Yeah, right. Interesting. So you mentioned before there's a new police minister, Reece Whitby, I think you said. Do you get any sense that he is trying to not necessarily undo some of this sort of stuff, but just take a different approach and try and make it more practical or make it work a bit better? Do you get a sense of that at all?
Well, I can now assure SSAA members of this that there's been lots of noise in the social media landscape for the last couple of months. Many of our members will be across that. We're often accused at the SSAA of not communicating well enough, and I'm not always staring down the barrel of a camera on social media, pleading my case or begging for money or being upset. So what I can tell SSAA members in Western Australia and assure them is that one day after the police minister was sworn in, those people that are doing their bidding on social media don't receive a phone call from the minister's office. The Sporting Shooters Association of Western Australia receives a phone call from the minister's office seeking to engage with us as the peak body for firearm ownership in Australia. So they need to understand, our members, that we are working tirelessly. We still maintain the integrity and the calibre of a respected, organised sporting association in Western Australia, and that I will be meeting with the minister in the next fortnight to discuss the ramifications of the Firearms Act and the firearm regulation on behalf of SSAA members in Western Australia. And I suspect that I won't be sitting in the minister's office with the social media influencers that do a very good job of telling everyone how much they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to chat. It's easy to sit in front of a camera. It's much more difficult to actually get things done. And one is tailored towards likes and Manification. What do they call it? I can't remember the name. Monetization. Sorry, that's the word I'm looking for. One is tailored towards monetization and making money out of your YouTube channel and growing your followers, and the other one is actually getting stuff done. So they're two different approaches. And
I might add for Western Australian members of the Sporting Shooters Association that their state executive management team are all gainfully employed in other roles, and that we are all volunteers, and that is not a tugging on the heartstrings and an excuse. But the bottom line is, some of these other people that are trying to reach into the hearts and minds of SSAA members, they don't have a full-time job. So they can happily wake up at whatever time of the day, turn the camera on at 10 o'clock in the morning and start their sad sob story. And we don't do that. We navigate and we manage as the state executive members, covering the various regional centres of Western Australia and the Perth metropolitan area. We're busy working. Many of us work in the industry, and we're busy fighting at either end of the scale after hours, 7 days a week, trying to stay engaged with the government, trying to look after the best interests of SSAA members, and in this instance, run 70 clubs across Western Australia, which is a big place. So
I noticed an uptick in your figures.
Book.
I noticed an uptick in your membership just recently, so that's a good thing. You obviously got people joining. I imagine part of
100%. Sorry to cut you off there.
No,
And
I just imagine some of that's driven by the changes to the legislation. But regardless, it's still a good thing that people are prepared to do what it takes to keep shooting. I mean, part of me thinks one of the best things people can do is, if you're upset about the firearms laws, go and get as many firearms as you can. Make sure you keep your license. Encourage your friends to join up and get their license. I mean, I think the answer in the long term is more people shooting. Right, so the more people we have shooting, the harder it is to really crack down on shooting. The fewer of us there are, the easier it is for them to get rid of the sport.
look, one of the other important things to note for the firearm community in Western Australia, some people have been unable to join the dots. In April 2023, the Sporting Shooters Association of Western Australia formed the WA Firearm Community Alliance. And regardless of what some people may think or believe, that WA Firearm Community Alliance consists of all of the major representative bodies, firearm dealers, repairers, individual licence holders, pest controllers, manufacturers, etc., etc. And that WA Firearm Community Alliance has been created, driven and run by the Sporting Shooters Association. So those people that are confused that the SSAA is not doing anything and they haven't heard anything, well, then perhaps they need to go and have a good look at the WA Firearm Community Alliance and see all the heavy lifting that has been done. We have been using that instrument and that vehicle to engage with the government rather than the SSAA leading the charge on its own. We've engaged everybody else.
Yeah, no, and it's definitely the way to go. I mean, I can tell you, as you know from personal experience, that the best way, the most effective organisations are those that come in as a unified voice across their own industry. So, if you have 3 different organisations, all from different, all purportedly from the same industry, all saying different things, you just choose to talk with the one that's most convenient for you. But if you have a unified body, and you're working together as an industry, and everyone's towing the line, well, then it makes it a lot easier to be effective. So, that's the right approach in my view. Yeah.
And again, that's not to say that there's not other shooting organisations out there in Australia that have been, banging the drum and trying to engage with firearm owners across Western Australia and elsewhere. And I can tell you that the Sporting Shooters Association of Western Australia haven't blocked other organisations from being part of the discussion. They can do their own heavy lifting. And if they think that at the 11th hour that they're going to come along and they're going to hitch their caboose to some 8 years of heavy lifting that's been done by the likes of the Sporting Shooters Association and the WA Firearm Traders Association, well, squawking about not being able to be involved in the argument instead of just doing it doesn't cut the mustard with us. And we're doing our bit and they can do their bit. We don't own the landscape. They can go and cut their own path. They can get some runs on the board and they can represent all of these firearm owners that they say they represent. But in all of the meetings that I've been with the government, the minister and WA Police, I haven't seen any of those representatives in those rooms. And it's not my job as the state president of the Sporting Shooters Association to get those people a Guernsey. That's their job.
Yeah, fair enough too. With the, I think we were talking earlier today about, was it the serious offences implications? Is it right? If you've got a serious offence in the last 15 years, it starts to get difficult for you to maintain a firearms licence. Can you go through that a little bit?
Right. So what we're dealing with there is that the legislation was constructed in WA to introduce disqualified organisations and disqualifying offences. And in effect, anybody that has ever been convicted of a serious offence, which is an offence that carries a term of imprisonment of 5 years or more, well, the legislation has now got a massive unintended consequence that it is allowing WA Police to cancel licences of people, firearm owners, that in some instances have had a licence for 10 years or more. And because of the nature of this legislation that you're now being tried for your crime twice. Yeah. And WA Police are applying legislation retrospectively. And I can assure our SSAA members that we are legally interrogating that with some of the best minds in the country, that if legislation is introduced, and legislation is always changing, that it isn't the case that it should be applied retrospectively, regardless of the construction of the WA Firearms Act, that 10, 15 years ago, there was an offence that you were part of, may have been an accident or whatever else, and now this legislation is having the unintended consequence of allowing or empowering WA Police to cancel licences based on an historic offence that's deemed to be a serious offence. Now, that could be a motor vehicle accident. It could be any other number of not a serious offence that people think of, but it is being legally interrogated at this point. We are 14 days into the new regulations taking effect. So we did need that to happen so that we could see what the extraordinary powers of WA Police would look like. And we are trying to stay engaged with WA Police to just see what the intent is here. So we are working on that.
So you've got legal advice on that, and I assume you got legal advice more broadly on the Act itself. And I mean, I'd be surprised if the government didn't have the power to do most of what it's done. But I assume the flaw will be in some of the clauses and some of the little way they've drafted regulations and things like that. But generally, state governments have the power to do these things. They certainly aren't required. In the federal government is required to give just compensation when it compulsorily requires something, but states aren't. And I assume that was the case in terms of firearms and everything else. So, the way that you sent out those template letters to people and they sent them into the minister and then he initiated that buyback, I think that's an example of them doing something they legally don't have to, but were pressured into doing.
And again, there's plenty of people out there that are making claims that it was all down to their actions. But I can tell you, having, again, spoken to senior police that are involved in this entire firearm project reform, that this buyback was heavily influenced by the thousands of templates that were drafted by SSAA members and sent into the minister's office. One letter from one lawyer wasn't going to do it. It is the power of the people, and it is the power of the organisation like the Sporting Shooters Association that made the compensation scheme for what has recently been termed a rapid release firearm. And lots of people are unhappy about the levels of compensation, but my message to them is it's better to keep your boots on and stay in the fight than try to run down the road barefoot on a hot day. So most of the people that I've spoken to in the SSAA environment that have participated in that have also been given the opportunity throughout that program to do a like-for-like replacement for the firearm that was prohibited. So they have then, in a short space of time, had another similar firearm, same caliber, expedited onto their licence by WA Police. And now it's been announced some 2 weeks ago that there will be a measure of compensation paid to those licensed firearms holders that surrendered or sold or rendered their prohibited firearm. It is of no consequence to the WA Police buyback team. If you had a prohibited firearm on your licence in Western Australia on the 21st of December 2024, you will be eligible for the compensation scheme that has been announced and is available on the WA Police website. And the numbers equate to a touch over 4,000 people that have been impacted by that regulation. We haven't got the numbers yet about how many people did a like-for-like replacement and bought a different action type. Yeah. But anecdotally, talking to the dealer network across Western Australia, who are part of the WA Firearm Community Alliance, they've evidenced that there have been some pretty solid traffic in their stores. People are quite positive about that they've been able to get a firearm replaced, because in many instances, a lot of those prohibited firearms were the only firearm that a firearm license holder had. So under the WA legislation, if they disposed of that as the laws demanded, they would no longer have a firearm license. So those people, like everyone, had a genuine reason and a genuine need for that 22 bolt action firearm, which was deemed to be a rapid release firearm or a 12 gauge shotgun. And so they were able to then get a replacement firearm without paying a $295 additional application fee in WA and without filling out an additional application. So that's a success story, regardless of what people want to peddle out there on social media. And I will stand proud with the SSAA State Executive in Western Australia and the WA Firearm Traders Association and say that we had a huge impact. We drove that operation, and I've been assured that we had a huge impact on that happening.
Brilliant. And I just think into the future, politics is often, it's a short-term game, but it's also a long-term game. And, you know, I don't think any of us are keen to keep living under these arrangements. I think there's a long-term element to how do we start to roll back some of these things and get back to the National Firearms Agreement, right? Because these have gone way further than the National Firearms Agreement. So how do we do that over time? Have you given any thought to how we might do that, or are you going to put that off a little bit and just get through the next, you know, few months and work out the transition arrangements to the current system?
So what we are focusing on at the moment is to try to assist as many firearm owners. Many are not SSAA members. And one of the key points there is the SSAA as a body helps anybody that rings us, helps anybody that emails us. And we encourage people to join the SSAA, but we are the first port of call for many. They don't know who to speak to. Lots of people are reluctant to speak to the police because it's been such a heavy game for the last couple of years. So our focus is to help as many landowners, as many firearm owners, as many sporting competitors to retain their firearms, navigate through the digital system, because whether we like it or not, it's here. It's been legislated, passed by the democratically elected Parliament of Western Australia. And in the next few months, we need to make sure that as many people as possible don't throw their hands up in the air and leave the sport, leave the activity of owning a firearm and going hunting. And that's our focus. Trying to bring back some of the regulations where they are clearly proving to be ineffective and impractical, as well as some of the legal ramifications of the unintended consequences of the extraordinary powers in the Firearms Act, are the three key points that we're focusing on. And it's important to let SSAA members know that more often than not, we spend as much time having to put out fires from people that are out there with potentially good intentions, but we spend more time trying to put out fires from people inflaming the situation rather than dealing with what's directly in front of us. The government of Western Australia is not going anywhere. We had political success. The Labor government in Western Australia do not control the upper house anymore. And so the SSAA is still in the room. We'll be engaging with the police minister and we'll be focusing on those three key points moving forward through the next few months.
Yeah, brilliant. And look, there's probably one last question really is, do you see, I mean, you've been through this process now in Western Australia, you've seen, you know, where it started and where it eventually culminated. Do you see anywhere else in Australia like the early signs that another state might be trying to take a similar course of action or, you know, trying to head down that Western Australian path?
Well, I think recently there's been a number of news articles and a rattling of the chain in Queensland, where there's been, you know, some drastic confusion about particular calibers and additional information. We've also seen some evidence out of Tasmania where there's an increased scrutiny on police requesting that firearm applicants or existing licence holders go through new health assessments and various tests and what have you. And as an organisation that's been around for 75 years, I think you'll agree that the SSAA supports assurances through regulation that the right people in the right stage of their life and not under any health pressure have access to firearms. It's as simple as that. But what we don't support is these overbearing intrusions into people's lives that has no impact on their ability to safely and legally retain a firearm licence or apply for a firearm licence. And I think if governments around Australia stop this consideration that everybody with a firearm is a threat, because 99.99% of firearm owners have done the right thing for over 100 years and will continue to do so, And it's about time that the governments around Australia started to give some respect to the firearm owning community, instead of trying to frighten the rest of the public that we're all sitting around waiting to turn into a criminal.
Yeah, that's true. And again, I think, come back to that point, the more people that own firearms, in terms of, you know, having been through the licensing process and everything else, then the harder it is for them to do that. So thanks, Fitzy. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you. Really enjoyed the chat. Good luck over there. Let us know if we can help with anything, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks very much, Tom.